I'm going to talk to you tonight about how to be a bold and provocative designer. Now, a few weeks ago, I was watching an episode of Abstract, the Netflix documentary about design. And they were profiling this guy, Tinker Hatfield, who is a footwear designer at Nike. And he is responsible for some of their most successful shoes. He came up with these, the Nike Air Max, which actually almost got him fired because some of his colleagues thought it was a bit too radical. He made the Nike Air Jordans a massive success for well over 20 years. And he even designed the self-lacing shoes that Michael J. Fox wears in the film Back to the Future too. So he's a pretty cool dude. And trainer aficionados absolutely see this guy as a living god, right? They worship him. And the shoes that he designs are absolutely must-have items for them. They're really, really kind of significant parts of their identity and their worlds. And that's really, pretty cool. So as I'm watching this documentary, Tinker said two things towards the end that really struck a chord with me. And the first one was this. If people don't love or hate your work, you just haven't done all that much. And I actually paused the documentary at this point, just to kind of stop and think about that for a minute. If people don't love or hate your work, you just haven't done all that much. And as I sat there pondering that statement on my sofa, I realized that a lot of design, it doesn't really move me in any way. I don't find it particularly engaging. And what Tinker does is really focus on creating an emotional connection through his work and not just satisfying functional needs. He very much sees himself as a provocative designer, and for him it's all about eliciting an emotional response from the people that use and buy his products. Okay, so the other thing that Tinker said was more a piece of advice. And it went something a bit like this. If you just stay in your studio and try to dream up new ideas, that's not a very good foundation for your idea. You need to get out there and experience life. So for Tinker, the boldness and the provocativeness of his work doesn't come from being in the studio, from sketching shoes and making prototypes. It comes from immersing himself in the fabric of life. And I 100% agree with him on that. How on earth are you going to create a product or service that somebody might love if you don't understand what matters to them? What makes them tick? And so if you want to be a bold and provocative designer, surely you need to spend a lot less time in your world and a lot more time in the worlds of other people. Now, with the rise of project approaches like lean and agile, we all seem to be in an absolute rush to make a solution, right? And at the start of a project, we don't tend to give ourselves that time to really understand people, to understand what makes them tick. And I want to spend the rest of my talk talking to you about why that is and what you can do to immerse yourself in the worlds of other people a little bit better. So let's start where most projects start, with a design brief. Now, I hate most design briefs that I get from clients because they tend to frame the challenge in a really, really rational and uninspiring way. They give me absolutely no clue about how to create an emotional connection with the people that I'm designing for. And 9 times out of 10, they've usually decided what the solution is before they've even given me the brief. So you get challenges like, we would like to redesign the hotel experience, and we want you to design a smartphone app that lets people do everything from booking a room to controlling the lights and the temperature of their suite. The app's got to be intuitive, and it's going to use personalization to surface the features that matter most to our customers. And it sounds really great, but it's not actually that great and inspiring place to start a project. And these briefs talk about audience, and they usually frame audience in the terms of customer segments. And they list off kind of quite high-level needs of these audiences, and you get predictable things like, our customers are time poor and expect a high level of service. Or our customers are in search of the authentic, blah, blah, blah. Okay? This seems like a really terrible place to start a project to me. And I'm really kind of like, why on earth is this where most projects start? Well, if you think about it, the dominant business culture in the industrialized world is underpinned by the idea that business management is a hard science. That everything follows a process, can be measured, and can be optimized within an inch of its life. So let's have a look at how that plays out in the development of design projects and the engagement of designers. Most projects, design projects, start life as a set of facts. Somebody within a client's organization looks at some data and either spots a problem or an opportunity that they think design can solve. Perhaps conversion's been dipping over the past few months, or maybe customer satisfaction's taken a bit of a dive. Or perhaps they've been looking at market data and think there might be an opportunity to increase their share. When is there not? And those facts that the clients gather together, they tell you about what's happened and what is right now, but they're not particularly creatively inspiring, and they don't really give you very much sense about the direction that you should be taking. Now, clients are not stupid. They recognize that too. And so what they typically go and do at this point is try and understand, well, what do those facts mean for our organization? What should we do to address them? And so they go off and they do some investigations. So they ask questions like, well, why is our conversion slipping? What are our competition doing that's giving them such a huge share of our market? Or what features should we be offering to customers that we're not doing currently? They go and generate lots of findings that make sense of those facts. And they use those findings to frame the design challenge, and even to decide what kind of solution they think is going to fix that problem or opportunity that they've identified. Now, at this point, they're kind of done listening and trying to figure out what the problem is, and they want to get down to some action. And this is usually the point at which they write a design brief and try and engage a designer. Into the action stage. And so, as a designer, you're given this bunch of facts and findings in the format of a brief, and expected to magic up some kind of market-winning widget, website, or app that they think they need. And so you do your best, you try and design something for them, and then it goes into production and is launched with great fanfare. And then the client starts to monitor how that thing you've designed is doing, how it's improving their business performance. And so they start to kind of report on what you've done. And then the whole cycle starts again as they get you to optimize what you've been creating. Now, there's nothing wrong with that approach per se if you are optimizing something that already exists or trying to copy somebody else's product or service. But it cannot deliver bold and provocative work because it comes from a place of real rational thinking, which tends to lead to quite conceptually flat work that creates no emotional connection with people. Now, most designers I know don't particularly like being stuck in that little action box in the corner, brick free. And so they try and push to do some research of their own up front, to try and get some findings that are going to inspire their creative output. And the persuasive ones usually do get to do some research up front. There never seems to be that much time to do it. So off they go, doing interviews with the target audience, or perhaps doing some user testing of an existing product or a competitor product. Perhaps they do some focus groups, or maybe even a survey. The problem, though, with these approaches is that they don't actually help you understand how to connect emotionally with people very well either. And that's because they tend to frame people in very narrow terms as users. And they ask questions like, how do users choose a bank account? Or a paint swatch? Or how to get home at the end of the night? They ask, do users prefer this feature or that feature? You get the idea. The problem with those kind of questions and approaches is that they don't immerse you in the lived experience of the people that you're designing for. And so they can only ever really give you requirements that direct and guide you in quite a rational way. Now, those things are not unimportant. You want to get the design right, but they're not going to help you create that emotional connection. Those research approaches also make some quite dangerous assumptions about people if you're trying to understand how to emotionally connect with them at the outset of a project. They assume that context isn't really that important. We can bring someone into the lab and get them to use something and we'll understand what they need, right? They assume that people are fully aware of all of their needs. They also assume that people make logical, well-reasoned decisions based on that understanding of their needs. And finally, they assume that people are able to articulate these needs and decision-making processes to you with absolute clarity. Well, sorry folks, our behavioural decision-making largely happens below the threshold of our consciousness and is usually governed by our emotions in a part of the brain known as the limbic system. Now, the limbic system is most akin to that of the brain function of a chimpanzee, which is why I like to call it our chimp brain. And if you want to see this in action, I've got a little experiment for you. Next time you're on a fairly empty escalator, I want you to do this. I want you to imagine that this pillar is a person. And go and stand pretty close behind them. And what you'll find them doing is taking a few steps away from you. And if you were to stop and ask them, well, why did you take a few steps away from me? They probably wouldn't even realise that they'd done it. And if they did, they might say something to you like, well, you were standing a bit too close to me. They would be very unlikely to say to you, I was scared, which is what their chimp brain is actually experiencing. So we all have a sense of our personal space. And when you stand behind that person on the escalator, you step into their personal space. And their chimp brain becomes aware of your presence and views it as a threat. And feeling fearful does what it feels is the most sensible thing to do and takes flight. Now, the reason that that person wouldn't be able to fully explain to you what was driving their behaviour is because our chimp brains have absolutely no capacity at all for language. That is to say, they express themselves through emotion and behaviour, but not in words. Context is also incredibly important for how our chimp brains experience and respond to the world. So if you were to try that escalator experiment again at rush hour in a busy tube station, it wouldn't work. It would completely fail. And that's because our sense of our personal space shrinks in a crowd. And so we feel totally comfortable with somebody standing right behind us. So let's bring this back to being a bold and provocative designer. If you want to understand how to create an emotional connection with someone, it is not enough to sit and watch them use something in a research lab. It's not enough to ask them whether they like something or not. That's quite superficial. You need to set yourself up to design for people, not users. So how do you do that? Well, as you might have guessed, it means, first of all, getting out of your design studio. And second of all, sorry Stuart, getting out of the design lab. Okay, good. And when you do that, taking on an anthropologist's mindset, right? Appreciating that we live in very complex and layered worlds. So at the moment, we are all in the world of the conference. But given that we're at City University, we're also in the world of academia. Some of us more full-time than others. Later on, this world of the conference is going to move to the world of the pub. Yay! And after that, you're probably going to move to the world of your home. Now, each of these worlds that we inhabit are made up of objects, interactions, interfaces, physical spaces, digital spaces, experiences, and other people. And if you want to truly get to the people that you're designing for, you need to understand what each of these elements means to them and how that meaning is inflected by context. This is what we call discovery research. And just to give you an example of what I'm talking about, I want to just show you a little snippet from a discovery research project I did a few years ago, which we ran as a diary study, and it was on the topic of what does it mean to take care of family. So one of our participants sent us this photograph, and she said, "Oh God, this is a mess." And what she really wanted to do was tidy that room up and clean it before her family came home from school and work, to show them that she really cared about them. Now, this lady also had a very demanding baby that day, and so she didn't get time to tidy and clean that room. And when we spoke to her about this photograph, it became very apparent that it represented failure to her, that she was somehow an incapable mother because she was only able to take care of the needs of her baby and not take care of the family as a whole. Later that day, she sent us this picture, which she described as pure bliss. Now, not very much has changed in that picture. The room is definitely still a mess. Yeah. But the presence of her family completely changes her experience of that room and what it means to take care of her family. So when they're not there, all she can see is a mess to be tidied. But when they're there all happy and hanging out together, that mess just kind of fades away. And what becomes significant is spending time with the people that she loves, and that's how she wants to show that she cares for them. These two photographs tell us a lot about what it means to take care of family, but also how situation can foreground and background different feelings and responses. Okay. So you might assume that doing discovery research is all about people watching, right? So you can just sit back, watch people going about their daily lives, and insight and inspiration is just going to strike like a bolt out of the blue. Well, if only it was that simple. There's a very big difference between passively seeing people and actively observing them. Actively observing people requires you to attune yourself to what I like to call the magic of the mundane. And these are the really familiar things that we do every day without conscious thought that tell me as a researcher huge amounts about who you are as a person and how you behave. And attuning yourself in this way requires three things. It requires a really good research question. It also requires some critical lenses to kind of interrogate what you're observing. And it also requires a lot of practice, I'm afraid. It takes quite a lot of time to get good at this stuff. But let's start with framing the research question. So let's imagine that we're a big design company, and we've got a client that's approached us, and they run a package holiday company. And they've seen a drop-off in the number of visitors returning to their site after they've made an initial visit. There's that fact that I was talking about earlier. And so they go and look at what the competition are doing and decide that they're offering much more inspirational content around holidays and making them more likely to book through competitors. There's that finding. And so they brought us in and want to start this project off, and they would like us to redesign that first contact experience that customers have with their website. Now, they're a pretty enlightened client, and they want to do some research up front. And they've got some quite strong ideas about what that research should be. They want us to focus on how do users find inspiration for their holidays, and what criteria do they use for choosing a holiday. That doesn't sound like it's going to deliver anything that's particularly inspiring, right? And that's because those are essentially business-focused questions, not people-focused questions. So we obviously want to go and do some discovery research. So our first job then is to reframe the research question. We want to expand out beyond these business questions and consider how someone might experience this thing and how their experience might be affected by context and maybe even society. We need to consider a research question at the level of the phenomena, which in this case is holidays. So a better research question, if we're going to go do some discovery research, might be something like this. What are holidays to our customers? And framing the research question at this level forces us to look at the topic of our inquiry through different lenses. Through the lens of people. What is a holiday to someone? What's their kind of mental model of what that is? What are they looking to get out of a holiday? Through the lens of experience, what does it mean to engage with this idea of a holiday? Where does inspiration come from? What happens when we get back from our holiday? And what does that experience mean to us? Through the lens of culture, what does it mean to be the kind of person that goes on a holiday? What does it mean to be the kind of person that goes on a mini break to Paris for the weekend versus spending a week at Butlins with the family? How do I use my holiday to say something about where I fit within the cultural fabric of life? And each of those lenses reveals a nuance of that larger phenomena, but also how those nuances affect behaviour, attitude, preferences, and reveals latent needs. And importantly, framing the research question in that way still addresses the business question that our client had. We're still going to see how people get inspiration about their holidays and how they choose a holiday provider. But we're also going to get much, much richer insight about people's experiences and how those experiences are shaped by the world around us and how to create an emotional connection with people. Okay, so that's the kind of theoretical bit before you start. How do you actually go and do it? Well, again, you're borrowing from anthropology and going to do some ethnography, which is essentially shadowing people and participating in what they're doing. And I'm not going to preach to the choir. I'm sure you're all familiar with what ethnography is. But I do just want to talk to you about recording a shadow. So I'm sure you've run research interviews and user testing sessions and you've videoed those things or audio recorded them. But when you're doing a shadow, you're typically spending more than an hour with somebody, and you might even be moving around quite a bit. The last one of these I did, my participant took me on a bike ride. And so videos and audio recording equipment kind of become a bit impractical. You can give them a life-logging camera that sort of takes a time-lapse of their day, but it's not really essential. This is my kit for going to do ethnography. I take my phone to take pictures of what I'm observing. I take a notebook and a pencil. And I use a pencil because it's much harder for the participant to read what I'm writing about them. And they always want to know what you're writing about them. And I also take quite a small notebook so I can easily shove it in my pocket if we're about to kind of get our hands dirty and do something together. And I write two kinds of notes in this notebook. I write descriptions of what I'm observing, so whether that be interactions, the physical setting that we're in, or conversations and the tone of those conversations, just kind of what's going on. And I also write notes about my reflections on what I'm seeing. So what are my impressions, thoughts, questions, ideas, and critiques of what I'm seeing. And those tend to be quite rough notes that I take, and then I try and write up my notes as soon as I can after I finish the shadow. The other approach you can take is a diary study. And there are specialist apps for that, but you don't need to use them. You can just as easily use email if you wanted to. And there you're asking participants to record their experiences and reflect on how they think and feel about the things they're capturing. Now, I'm sure you guys are all familiar with diary studies, so I'm not going to spend any more time on that either. And equally, analysing the data that comes back from doing this kind of research is very similar to what you'd do if you were analysing research from an interview, a focus group, a user testing session. So we don't really need to look at that either. What I do want to make a pit stop on, though, is the topic of insights. Because I think developing insights is one of the hardest skills to master. And it's what differentiates really good design researchers from kind of capable observers. Right? Everybody has the ability to make an interesting observation, to come up with a useful finding. But design researchers don't tend to be that satisfied with those things. They have this habit of incessantly asking why. Why is that thing that I'm seeing happening? Why is that thing that I'm hearing happening? Why is it significant? What does it mean? Why is this thing that I'm seeing over here related to that thing over there, even though they don't really look that alike? And good design researchers kind of take the answers to those questions and interpret what they mean, not just for their project, but for the client they're working with as well. And this is really important, because I think a lot of designers just focus on what does this insight mean for me and what I'm designing. But the really good design researchers extrapolate that and go, what does this mean for the business that I'm working with? So I can take that client with me on this journey to doing bold and provocative work. I just want to tell you a little bit about a book that I read recently by this guy called Gary Klein, who's a cognitive psychologist, who did a really interesting investigation into insights and where they come from. And he had this really lovely quote in his book about the effect of insights. So, insights shift us towards a new story, a new set of beliefs that are more accurate, more comprehensive, and more useful. I really like that. So insights take us and our clients to a new place. They help us see the world differently. And seeing the world differently is surely the best possible place to start if you want to do bold and provocative work. I want to bring you back to this model that I showed you earlier. If you're prepared to challenge the client brief and get some time to do some discovery research at the start of a project, you'll find yourself moving into a new and exotic place, the place of insight, that opens up radical new perspectives on the world and untapped opportunities for you to design for. But importantly, it'll also help the client to really think about what they're in the business of, help them redefine what they offer to customers and how. And so if you're a bold and provocative designer, you're going to be spending much more time hanging out at this end of that model than that end. I want to leave you with one final thought. I want you to be brave. I want you to challenge that client brief. Don't take the client's assessment of the problem, their audience, or even the solution that they think they need at face value. The problem is almost certainly business-focused, inward-facing, not framed as a people challenge. The solution that they want you to design probably isn't right. And there's almost certainly no scope and time to do any discovery research. But if you challenge that brief and give yourself the time and the space to really get people, you might actually create a product or service that somebody loves. Thank you very much.